Oh, in another life. Woo! Good morning. I love you. Good morning. Stevie the Guide here at your service from the banks of the Guadalupe River in Kerrville, Texas. It is 5 o'clock in the morning and it's getting colder outside. And I hope you're doing great. And I hope in some small way to raise my own vibration and in the process to help you raise yours. And but I gotta tell you this morning, I'm wandering into uncharted territory, and I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen. But you know, I'm on hour 51 of this online streaming adventure, and I haven't known where it's going to go from the beginning. I'm getting a little less afraid all the time. It seems like as I do this exercise, it peels back these layers of sort of fear and intimidation and stuff, and I grow less and less afraid to share my heart authentically. And where are we going with this? Where is this headed? And I admitted yesterday, you know, I'm sort of past the point of no return. This is one of my very favorite pictures of myself. This was taken down in Ecuador back in 1994, out in the jungle, and it was in the high jungle. It wasn't way down in the Amazon. Actually, it was in the high jungle, but all of the Andes Mountains until you get up, you know, past the vegetation. It's all jungle, high jungle, low jungle. And some of it's muddier than others. You can see on this picture here, if you look closely, my pants are all covered with mud. We've been walking through mud that was knee deep at some times. And this was, I was with a friend, and he was the organizer of a run. I think it was a triathlon race, but there was a jungle portion to this race, and he was mapping out a trail that he thought he knew. We had a couple of local dudes that were going with us, supposedly were going to be our guides, but we started that trek at like 6 in the morning, and by 4 or 5 in the afternoon, we didn't know where we were going. And I was exhausted, and I didn't, you know, it was just like, there's nowhere to go back to. You got to keep going forward. And it's kind of what I was talking about yesterday on the Inca Trail. There was no turning back at that point. There was nowhere to go back to. And that's kind of, well, and we did, obviously, we made it out of the jungle finally. But it you know, it was about dark when we finally got out of those woods. And I don't know where this adventure is leading, but I have a feeling that my explorations are going to, you know, ruffle some feathers, and that's been my fear. But it's getting less in me, and the reason I say that is because I read this quotation by Henry Ford. Here's a picture of Henry Ford. That's Henry Ford of the Ford Motor Company, and he looks about as a Christian American is apple pie and Chevrolet, but that would be apple pie and Ford. Baseball, apple pie, Chevrolet. Henry Ford, I read a quote and it really grabbed me. And it says, when I discovered reincarnation, this is Henry Ford talking. When I discovered reincarnation, it was as if I had found a universal plan. I realized that there was a chance to work out my ideas. Time was no longer limited. I was no longer a slave in the hands of the clock. That's Henry Ford. That was a quote in the San Francisco Examiner in April of 1938. Henry Ford, the famous car maker. I always admired Henry Ford. There was about 100 car makers in the United States, all trying to make automobiles when Henry Ford was trying to make automobiles. A lot of people don't know that. But Henry Ford was not the inventor of the automobile or how to make an automobile. His success came from innovation. He looked beyond what other people were doing and did it a different way. He's the one that created the assembly line method. And the way he discovered that was that he was passing, I think it was in Chicago or somewhere, he's passing by a meat packing house. You know, you have the cattle stockyard on one side, and then the cattle go in to the building. And on the other side, out comes packages of meat, you know. And there's just a steady stream of production going from one end to the other. And Henry was like, how the hell do they do that so quickly? And he went in and he studied the meat packing industry. And what he learned was that you didn't have one guy trying to build the whole thing. You had one guy doing one specific thing all day long. And so one guy would, cut the meat this way, and one guy would pack the meat, and one guy would, this and that. And so he just took that process and put it in the car industry. And the guy had vision. All of a sudden, he's turning out Model T Fords that your average American can afford. He was turning out like 90 cars a minute or some such. It was incredible. But anyway, Henry Ford stumbled upon reincarnation, and all of a sudden he got a revelation. Now, I don't know what his religious or spiritual background was before that, but this quote here about reincarnation was striking to me because, and let me read it to you again. When I discovered reincarnation, it was as if I had found a universal plan. I realized that there was a chance to work out my ideas. Time was no longer limited. I was no longer a slave to the hands of the clock. All right? And what does that mean? And I know I'm opening up a can of worms here, but what does that mean? Well, you have reincarnation as opposed to what? In Christian terms, you don't have reincarnation. You have this one life. You got this one shot to get it right, and then you either go to heaven or hell, basically, or some think purgatory, which is sort of a in-between place, kind of like waiting around in court, until your number's up. I don't know. Purgatory is a whole nother kettle of fish. But what this means is you don't just have this one life to get it right. All right. You don't just have this. In fact, reincarnation is more akin to going through a series of education: first grade, second grade, third grade, junior high school, college, master's, PhD. That's what reincarnation is about. Whereas in the Christian terms, when you don't have that, this life is it. And you either basically do what we say and get it right and walk the walk and talk the talk, or you're screwed. What's that famous line that I've quoted before from Braveheart, One of my favorite characters in the movie Braveheart is Stephen, Crazy Stephen from Ireland. He thinks he owns the whole island of Ireland, and as the British are, shooting arrows at the Scottish, and things are looking really grim, Stephen turns to Mel Gibson, William Wallace, and he says, "I had a talk with the Almighty this morning, and he thinks he can get me out of this mess, but he's pretty sure you're fucked." And that was one of the greatest lines in the whole movie, and it sums up this all or nothing prospect that's Christianity, and it is, it is why the primary reason why I couldn't be honest and continue with the Baptist faith. I couldn't. It would be dishonest for me to agree. In fact, I went further than a lot of people in the Baptist church. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. I encourage you, if you're drawn to that, please go. It's helped my life immeasurably. But I had reached a point where I had not only been a part of the church for 20 years, but then I became a Christian missionary, and with my family, we went down to Peru and served the Lord in all kinds of ways. And I learned a lot when I was down there about Christianity. And I learned how the Spanish Christians came in there and, for hundreds of years and killed and tortured and enslaved all these people. And I learned about an ancient culture that has no explanation of how they built buildings down there. And I read the Bible a couple of times down there. And I saw how the politics of churches work down there and all that. But anyway, I got a comprehensive education about Christianity as a missionary down in Peru. And it was, in many ways, it's such a beautiful experience. And I was, my heart was then and always shall be in the sharing of the love of Christ and trying to follow the simple teachings of Jesus Christ has been a damn good thing in my life. However, on the other side of that coin is this, often militant evangelism that tells people, it's our way or the highway. Don't believe your parents and grandparents and elders of your community. Believe us. And I had a problem with that. Some people don't, and some people think that's a good thing. And hey, more power to you. But simple sharing of love thy neighbor as thyself, and doing what you can to be selfless, to help people in need. That's where my heart always was. And we did a lot of good. And I'm grateful, tremendously grateful to the members of the Baptist Church that helped support that. And believe me, it was a difficult thing to leave the Baptist Church. Just like Jimmy Carter when he left the Southern Baptist Convention over his principles. He didn't like the way they treated women. And I personally don't like the exclusive part. Here's what happened to me. Basically, in a nutshell, I had reached a point where I had studied the Bible. I was actually, teaching some of the Bible in a big Baptist church in Houston. I had been a missionary, and I had friends in this big Baptist church, and they invited me to be, or they nominated me to be a deacon of this large Baptist church, and I was thrilled. I was honored. But when they sent me a little contract in the mail, and the last couple of questions were, do you believe that the Bible is the complete and perfect and eternal Word of God? And I couldn't honestly answer that in the affirmative, because I have lived in Asia. I've studied Buddhist culture. I've studied a little bit of Hindu culture and history. I know a lot about Egyptian culture and things like that. And so this is my Bible right here. Belongs to me. And I've come to the conclusion. You see how much I marked that Bible up? I love reading this thing. It's full of wisdom, all right? But I've come to the conclusion that while I listen to many people's interpretation of this book, this very complicated book, at the end of the day, this Bible belongs to me, all right? And I get to interpret it any way that comes through this God-given filter any way I want to. All right, and I'm going to be sharing some of those thoughts. I've come to this place. I'm headed into uncharted territory. I've been under a blanket of fear about my interpretations of the Bible, the way it comes through me. I've been afraid of that. And there's good reason for me to be afraid of that, because I've been cowered by people who have gone to seminary and got PhDs and this stuff, that they say, we're the only people that can truly give you the interpretation of the Bible. And before all those Protestant guys who went to seminary, it was the Vatican who said, you can't even read the Bible. I mean, you could get killed just for owning one of these things for a very long time, all right? They could kill you if they knew you were in possession of this book, all right? Where did this come from, all right? I always go back when people, hit me in the head with the Bible and start quoting the Bible and saying the Bible says this and the Bible says that. Generally, what I tend to do to undercut that argument is to say, okay, who published the Bible and who had creative control over that publication? All right, the original publication came from the Roman Catholic publishing house, all right? And they were the ones that took the parts that they wanted and dumped all the rest, and basically labeled all the other scriptures that were submitted to be in the Bible. They deemed all that blasphemous and punishable by death. And this is the reason why you find those parts hidden out in the desert, in Nag Hammadi, or up in caves, in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think it's called Qumran. You can imagine these poor guys running off with their scriptures, afraid for their lives. And because the Romans, if they got their hands on the stuff they didn't like, they just burn it, and probably kill the guys who told the story. All right, and not probably, they did. And so all I'm saying is, I'm not telling you that the Bible's wrong, but I question who published it, who had creative control, who had the ability to edit it, change it, do whatever they want with it, and then people that created the schools that told you what it meant. All right, and they have enforced this interpretation for hundreds of years militarily and psychologically and economically. And so when you hear the term back in the Old West, I think it was on The Rifleman with Chuck Connors, there was this phrase always comes to mind, and a lot of my interpretation comes from TV shows and movies and things like that. But somebody comes upon him and asks him this question: "Are you a God-fearing person? Are you God-fearing, boy?" That strikes me, that question. Are you God-fearing? All right. No, I'm not God-fearing at all. I am church-fearing. I'm church establishment-fearing. I'm afraid of being labeled as a creep and a weirdo. I'm afraid of being ostracized from the group. I'm afraid of my children being somehow harmed by something that I might say or do. I'm certainly afraid of the history of the Vatican, if you know anything about that, and how they have brutally conquered much of the world and established their embassies all over the place. My Catholic friends may not like my saying that, but it is so. And it became very evident to me when I lived down in Cusco, Peru. And so when you hold this book up to me and tell me this is the Word of God and there ain't no other, there's nothing else but this, all right? And on top of which, if you question any facet of that, if you explore, as Stevie the Guide likes to do, if you explore anything and go anywhere off the reservation that we, the establishment, do not like in your interpretation of this, well, we're going to label you as not being in the Spirit. We're going to label you as somehow lesser. We're going to ostracize you. We're going to knock the dust off our sandals and dump your ass, all right? And I got problems with that. I got problems when you tell me a story and I start to pick apart the edges of the story, and all of a sudden you get nervous and say, I cannot ask questions. You know, and it got to a point in my awakening process where I was asking too many questions for them to feel comfortable. And it's not my ambition to make people feel uncomfortable. It's not my wish to do that. But it is my wish to find out the answers. If turning over stones and turning a puzzle one way or the other like a Rubik's Cube to try to figure out the answer to it, if that bothers you, then it may be that you should switch the channel and not listen to this one, because that's exactly what I'm going to do. And the reason that there are churches all over this country, many of which are closing now. And my Baptist pastor will tell you that Christian churches are closing by the thousands in this country. And I'm sorry to hear that personally, because it's from where I've gotten a lot of morals and ethics and good friendships and relationships, and heard good, very intelligent stories. You know, you can derive a tremendous amount of truth and good from this. The study of the Bible is a very valuable thing, obviously, but people are, in my opinion, they're walking away from the static nature of the Bible, of the interpretation of Christianity. Either you walk with us or you go to hell. That's an unpalatable thing to many billions of people, really to the majority of the planet, all right? And it is a notion that we're going to point a gun at your head and you either do what we say or you're dead, all right? That's very unpalatable. You know, I wrote this book after I came back from the mission field, Secret Passages of Stevie the Guide. It's available on Amazon if you're curious about what I wrote about. It's about 350 pages. And it says on the back, just where do you think you're going? It's a series of short stories that I wrote that try to sort out my journey in Christianity, and a lot of it's just biographical Stevie the Guide. But I wrote this chapter here about Bible interpretation, and I related the Bible to Jack and the Beanstalk, because I talked to a friend who told me, I said, do you believe in the Bible? And he said, well, no, not really, but I believe the part about Jesus. And I got, as a Christian, I got a little miffed about that, and I wrote a chapter in my book about it. He says, and so my question was, if you believe the part about Jesus, why can't you believe all the other things? I mean, Jesus is just a supernatural character in a supernatural book. It has all kinds of different stories in it. Why do you believe that particular story? And so I wrote a chapter that related the Bible to Jack and the Beanstalk. And basically what I said in it was, the Bible's not, you can't pick apart the Bible like granola and pick out the best bits and dump the rest. It's like reading a fairy tale like Jack and the Beanstalk, and you tell me, well, I believe the part that Jack bought a handful of magic beans and traded the family cow for them and took them home. His mother got mad and threw him out the window, and the next morning they grew into a giant beanstalk up into the sky. You believe that part. And you also further believe that Jack climbed that beanstalk and he went up into the clouds, and he discovered a kingdom up there, and where he could walk around, right? You believe that part. But you don't believe the part with the giant and the pot of gold and the big castle and all. Yeah, that's ridiculous. And so how do you, my question was, how do you separate the two supernatural stories? And my my conclusion in this chapter called The Theory of Supernatural Selection. And so how can you be selective about which supernatural story you're going to believe? All right. And so my conclusion was, you got to believe all the Bible is the Word of God or none of it. And that's the party line. That was the appropriate party line for a Christian missionary book. All right. And that was some years ago. That was 5 years ago that I published this book. But my position has changed on that. My position has changed on the Bible. I believe, when you start to pick apart pieces of the Bible, people get real nervous, very upset, because they need to keep this as all one thing. It's a solid foundation that they can stand on. I look upon it as a very complicated book with history, with story, with certainly a lot of valuable morals and ethics and things that have come from very wise people. There's also parts of it that I discard out of hand, all right? And that's a fact. So I no longer stand on that platform of this is the complete and perfect Word of God, of the Creator of the universe, and there's no other words that bring us any kind of wisdom or spiritual inspiration. I don't buy that anymore, all right? And so therefore, I'm free to investigate that book and explore that book as Stevie the Guide would, and to check out anything. This whole quote of reincarnation really strikes to some of the heart of the Christian story. And when I think about what Henry Ford thought about, when you discover reincarnation and all of a sudden you realize, you know what? This life is not my only bite at the apple here. It's not my only shot at trying to get it right. It's not my only shot at trying to develop myself and my soul to be the best and highest and best it can possibly be. In Christianity, I just got this life, and basically, you're never going to get it right, because what it'll tell you is, even if your actions are good, your thoughts are not good, and they'll screw you up. And so your only shot is to accept Christ as your Savior and be dependent on that story. And if you don't do that, you're screwed, all right? And that's a very static position, a very static line. And you know what? It's snapping with a lot of people like me all over the planet, all right? And that is a fact. I didn't create that scenario. It's happening. And I went through a process of awakenings, and one of the things that snapped me after I'd gotten to be nominated into a leadership position in the Christian church, in the Baptist church, they put a contract in front of me, and I had this pen in my hand, and I was looking at the contract, and the last line says, "Do you believe in the eternal lake of fire for the non-believer? Sign here." All right, do you believe that? In my hand, I was ready to be considered as a deacon of this Baptist church, a large Baptist church, and my hand hovered over that contract, and I didn't know what to do, it was as if I blew a fuse in a way. There's something happened at that moment, and I could not sign that contract. It became real to me, I just sat the contract and sat on the corner of my desk for a couple of months, and it was a real dilemma, an integrity question of the highest order. Is what happened. They put in front of me, everything was soft. It's like a real estate deal, okay? You can say, oh yeah, I'm going to buy the house and I'll pay you this much, and I'll do this, I'll do that, but nothing is real until you get into the title company and execute the contract. And isn't it weird that the word execution is the same thing to close a contract as it is to hang somebody in the town square. Execution. To execute a contract is a sense of finality. The deal, the decision is made and the deal is done, and the guy is dead. All other options are dead, so when you execute that contract, and there was something final and something really difficult about trying to sign that contract that said, you agree with the eternal lake of fire for the non-believer. And the file box in my head began to roll. The colander in my mind began to sift. And all of a sudden, I'm like, what exactly do I believe? And what started to happen? People started come to my mind, and I started thinking about Joe Prigge, whose house I was in up in Hawaii during Hurricane Eva, during one of the most devastating hurricanes that ever hit the island of Kauai in 1982. Joe Prigge is, of Polynesian descent. He believes in Madame Pele, and he's the one that cared for us when we were in that terrible hurricane. And I thought about Dariush Hariri, my Iranian friend, who used to sing beautiful songs in Farsi, which is a Persian language. And I was thinking of Sami Fakhri from Lebanon, who I knew in school, and this wonderful, nice guy. I started thinking of Moy, who's down in the Amazon jungle, this guy who was raised in a natural spiritual environment, believes things like sunsets and butterflies and everything, plants all have life, and just on and on, the different people that came up into my life, that if I signed that document, I would be condemning all of them to the eternal lake of fire, because they are non-believers in this organization. And when it comes right down to it, for me, Christianity is simply a human organization that attempts to define spirituality, which I see as a universal gift. All right. And however people are expressing that universal gift. I've stayed in a Buddhist monastery in Thailand. I've lived in one for a year and a half recently here in Texas. I've spent time in Colombia where shamans and practitioners of natural medicine have a much more experiential way that they experience and explore spirituality. Very natural with the plants and on and on. So no, I don't believe in a closed system. I don't believe in a static line that if you don't do it our way, it breaks. I don't believe that. And so what does Buckminster Fuller say about all this? You know who Buckminster Fuller, the inventor, was? He has a wonderful quote that says about change. If you want to change things, he says, you never change things by fighting against the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And as the existing model of Christianity is showing signs of wear and showing signs of a different age, and I know many a pastor is still practicing. They would contest me on that. That's why we're headed into uncharted territory here, and I expect some blowback from that. But I reserve the right. This book here belongs to me, all right? And I reserve the right to read it and interpret it any way it comes to me. And I've got a fair bit of a Bible education, but it makes me no expert, no scholar. I believe in part, and here's the upshot, really, is that I believe that it's gotten far too legalistic, that the left brain logical has gotten in the way of the right brain intuitive, that the left brain logical with the rules and regulations says, if you don't buy our academic, literal interpretation of it, then you go to the eternal lake of fire, right? And not to mention that if you take Christian leaders of every different 31 flavors, whether they be Baptist or Methodist or Presbyterian or Catholic or what have you, Latter-day Saints, you got Jehovah's Witnesses, you got all kinds of people that interpret these words in every manner of different ways. So why don't I get to? All right. And I'm going to. It's exactly what I'm going to do, because I've been trained in this to some degree enough to speak my heart about it. And there's all kinds of interesting subjects that I can explore. And that's what Stevie the Guide likes to do, is explore. And so Buckminster Fuller, let me read that again. You never change things by fighting against the existing reality. I'm not fighting against Christianity at all. I'm grateful, very grateful for Christianity, and that I have moved through that body of education. It's helped me no end. Now, I strongly encourage you, keep going to your church. I do. I love going to church. I love the fellowship. I love learning new things and new perspectives about this book. I love the music, but you want to change things. You never change things by fighting against the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And so what might that new model be? Well, the first thing that pops into my mind is the Church of Intuition. The balance between left brain logical and right brain intuition. That's what we're talking about here. That's what I've been talking about for over 50 hours. All right, is raising the vibration, the Christ consciousness, by somehow bringing balance to this left brain logical and right brain intuitive, and allowing that small still voice to truly come forward. When you go into meditation, we're not talking about contemplative prayer here. All right, we're not talking about repeating a Bible verse over and over in your mind. We're talking about making that mind still. That small voice. You want that chattering left brain logical chattering monkey to be still. Pay attention to the breathing, allowing that right brain intuitive to open up and bring stillness, which allows it to speak to you, and thereby, because the right brain intuitive, it will not go along with the eternal lake of fire for the non-believer of our creed. It will not do that. And if you allow that right brain intuitive to come forward, it's not going to buy that story. All right. And especially if you know people of many other walks of life as I do, and I believe that I was supposed to travel this planet just so I get to know a few people. All right. Many good people, many strong believers in love in the Spirit. And I will not leave them. And if that's wrong, when I get to heaven, I'm going to tell God, I wouldn't leave those other people, Lord. I wouldn't do it. I didn't believe the humans in my neighborhood that said this is the only way. And I stayed behind to help the others and be a part of the global family. I just don't buy that. It's too static of a line. It's got to be flexible. I believe God brought us all here for a reason, and God's taken us all home after we get this education, and that is what Henry Ford was talking about. Henry Ford, one of the great leaders of this country, one of the wise men of our times, says, and I'll read it one more time. And this really, it is, reincarnation is not new, all right? It's been around long before Christianity, all right? Egyptians, Sumerians, all Asian cultures, Hindus, what they aspire to do in this life is to improve, but that they have more time after this to improve. And I don't buy something just because somebody tells me. In case you hadn't noticed, I don't buy it simply because somebody told me. I don't believe something just because you said so most of the time. What I believe is experiential. And part of the reason this strikes me is because I've had feelings of past lives. I've been through a quantum healing hypnosis session in which I lived in a past life as a British sailor. The details are very clear. I was also a member of the British Parliament. I traded sugar with Jamaica and Haiti and places like that. Had a big house and a wife and a family. It's as real to me as any other thing I've known here right now. And so it's not what Carl Jung says. I don't believe, I know. All right. And it strikes me as very interesting when somebody like Henry Ford says, when I discovered reincarnation, it was as if I had found a universal plan. A universal plan. I realized that there was a chance to work out my ideas. Time was no longer limited. I was no longer a slave in the hands of the clock. And time is not really a factor here. I like that. And I like the fact that Henry Ford said that. It makes me feel good. Because that's what I already know in my heart. I have memories of being in the military and following the orders of a number of different leaders, and probably doing things that were immoral because I was ordered to do so. And I have a strong feeling that I'm here moving through this process to try to improve that karma, and that. This is not my only bite at the apple. It's the notion of reincarnation is actually gives a person a chance to breathe a little bit and say, you know what, I'm not so much under the gun as I thought I was, as I've been told I was, as that for hundreds of years this corporation called Christianity has been telling us. All right, and I call it a corporation deliberately. Any church anywhere is a nonprofit corporation. One of the things I learned as a missionary is that they all want market share. All these churches, I got to come down to Peru, each and every one of them wants new members to generate more donations, to make them more powerful. And that's a fact. And some are more compassionate than others. They're all human beings. They're all flawed. But the point is that corporations tend to teach things that benefit the corporation and sometimes don't make as much sense to the human being. And again, I don't mean to tear down the existing model. That is not my intent. My intent is to find a new way that is not so static, that it allows me the freedom to grow and breathe and develop without having some eternal lake of fire pistol at my head. And I cannot live that way. And it's cost me plenty. And I've shed more than a few tears over the whole thing. And like Jimmy Carter, our former president, I found it very painful to leave the Baptist Church. Very, very painful. But at the end of the day, I could not have true integrity if I agreed to something, especially in writing, that I did not honestly believe. I would be a liar, all right? And so it's taken me a couple of years, folks, to get over that. But as I have done, 50 plus hours in this live stream broadcast, what I find is that my fear factor gradually goes down every time I do it. And my true authentic heart comes out. My vibration rises as I am honest and authentic, simply because I love you and I want to share what I know and what comes out of me honestly and authentically. And my hope is that as I do that, as I let my own authentic light shine, it allows other people to do the same, and that they cannot be so afraid. They don't have to, parrot the party line just to be accepted into the club, that they can tell us honestly how they feel. And That's what I want. I don't want people that cling to the herd. They're still in a certain kind of grade where I was for a long time, and that is where they should be. Those are good grades to go through. But I have emerged into another more open realm that's much easier to breathe in. And as that fear factor drops a little bit more, and I share more about my heart and my intuition, and I share the things that I've observed around this planet for 60 years, and I've got to explore it more than most, and I'm very blessed by God to have been able to do that. I don't believe that God is the exclusive occupant of any sanctuary, any human organization. God is a universal. God formed us. God brought us here, and I believe God intends us to find an education that's centered around love, and God's going to bring us home. And so what happens if you buy that whole reincarnation story, which again, it's not experience myself permanently or personally with knowing about past lives, and that is my honest reality. And so I have every reason to expect that if I don't get it quite right in this life, which it doesn't look like I'm walking it perfect yet, that I'll have another chance and another until I reach a certain level of education. And, I've always said that this life is much like basic training in the military. You go through basic training, you enter in there, and they don't talk nicely to you. They work you real hard physically, emotionally, and break you down. It's a really hard thing to go, especially like through Navy SEAL training and stuff. You get to a point in the middle of that, you start questioning, why do we got to do this? Why do they keep making us do this over and over? Why do they wake us up at 2 a.m. and make us run down the beach, or, whatever they do? I mean, those drill sergeants are skilled at wearing you down. And you don't know exactly why you have to go through that, as we do not know why about this life. But the supreme commander in the military, those commanders up there, they know why. They know that at some point very soon, you're going to enter into a larger theater of operations. You're going to enter into a completely new arena, and you're going to have certain skills in order to function in that arena. And when you get out of basic training, you may have to go into other special trainings. In fact, some people in the military that are in the higher levels, they're going through training their whole career. All right, they're constantly upgrading into more competent soldiers. And so if you take that metaphor as I do, I think that it fits with how we're going through life. We go through a certain level of education. We go into the larger theater of operations. We then enter into another level of education and so forth. And I think there's a certain acceptance. If you're desiring a better and better improvement, you want to grow, you can opt for more training, more education to go to that higher level. It's just like in academics, you want to get a better job, you get, a better degree. You got to go for a couple years into this or that. And so I believe that that's generally how it works. And we're headed into uncharted territory here, folks. I'm getting a little bit more confident in talking to that. Again, I have not felt, since I've owned this Bible, look how much I've read it, I've not felt that it belonged to me. I felt that it sort of belonged to the church, and I just kind of got to read it. I don't believe that anymore. All right, I believe that this book belongs to me, and I get to interpret it any way I want. I get to ask any questions I want about it. I don't believe what I read here, what I wrote in this book, which was basically that you can't question the Bible. And I ask difficult questions. I'm asking questions that exasperated my pastors, like, where was Jesus during those lost 18 years? Was he really in the carpentry shop, or did he go somewhere else? The vast majority of Jesus's life, he is arguably the main character in the Bible. We don't know where he was for the majority of his life. 33 years are unaccounted for. He's AWOL. And they will cling ferociously to the idea that he was in that carpentry shop with his father Joseph, and makes no sense to me at all. I can give you any number of ideas about where he might have been. Most logically, he was being trained somewhere, and they don't want to hear that, because that means he was associated with some older spirituality. Buddhism, Hinduism, the Essenes, the Egyptians, mystery schools, all that stuff, and where was he? And prove to me that it was in that carpentry shop. They don't like that. Who were these giants in the book of Genesis? All they talk about is the Nephilim, and they were here on the earth, and that's about it. And who were these sons of God that came down here and they mated with our women because they thought they were hot, And what sort of race of people did they produce? All right, and who was this sea monster at the end of the book of Job, the Leviathan? What was that all about? And when Moses went to Pharaoh and said, "Hey, man, God told me that you better let our people go, or He's going to turn the Red Sea into or the Nile River into blood, or bring locusts or whatever." And 3 or 4 times, the Pharaoh didn't bat an eye. He said, "Well, that's no big deal. My sorcerers can do that." That's biblical, folks. Pharaoh, the guy who could build pyramids and stuff, he had sorcerers that could do what God could do. Now, what's up with that? All right. And tough questions. This book is full of tough questions. And Stevie the Guide likes to explore. And now that I've explored much of the planet, my favorite thing to explore is all these spiritual questions. I like that. I like to explore the history and how it matches with spirituality. One of the questions I asked my pastor, he hated this question. I said, "Well, now tell me this. The Greek gods like Apollo and Zeus and, Poseidon and Hercules, all those were giants, right?" And he said, "Yeah, right." And those Greek gods, and they lived on Mount Olympus. There were a bunch of giants with superpowers and stuff, right? And I said, "Yeah, right." And I said, "Well, okay, but those were like fantasy. That's myth, right?" And he said, "Yeah, that's right, Steve. What's your point?" And I said, "Well, we got these other giants in the book of Genesis, the Nephilim, but those giants are like real, right? And so, I'm kind of wondering, which are the real giants? Will the real giants please stand up?" He hated that. But when you start putting the Bible together with other more ancient stories, the Bible looks like a condensed version of a much older story. All right, that's what it looks like to me. It looks like a condensed version that they crammed, especially in those, the Old Testament. A lot of these churches, they don't even want to touch the Old Testament. They're like, no, we're a New Testament church. And that's because these pastors, man, they don't know how to explain a lot of this, all right? But what it appears to me to be, without any disrespect to all the value I've gotten out of the Bible, it appears to me to be a compilation of wise people in history, of historical fragments, especially in the Old Testament. I mean, you got these people wandering around the desert following, what is this thing they followed in the desert for 40 years? It smoked during the day as it flew around, and at night it burned like fire, and it could provide things like manna, which was some kind of strange food they were eating. And so I like to turn these questions over and over. And when you start looking at the older stories here, why is it they don't really want to talk too much, and we're not taught too much in school about ancient Egypt, and especially about Sumerians? And we're going to be getting into this whole Sumerian story. That one interpretation of the original stone tablets that are found, the cuneiform baked clay tablets, there's about 1 million of them that we don't know anything about because they don't teach us anything about it. But at least one group of people interpret those stories as, in the beginning, a race of space-traveling gold miners came to Earth from the planet Nibiru. Their name was the Anunnaki, and they landed here. They made a gold strike on this planet, especially down in South Africa. A guy named Michael Tellinger talks about that. And then they needed a slave race of people, so they genetically altered the local primates, which became man. And then man, ate of the tree of good and evil somehow, and became more independent, more aware, and got loose from the garden. And then you have these slaves, all these Hebrews, by the millions who want to get out of Egypt, and they run away, and it's a freaky story, when you start looking at the history of mankind. And they've tried to put it all in this sort of nice little package that's only about 6,000 years old, and they've worked real hard to do that. But Stevie wants to know, is it real or is it Memorex? That's an old saying from a commercial. Anyway, I'm turning over the stones here, folks, and the gloves are off. And after 50 hours of this live stream, we're getting down to what I really like to talk about, which is, where do we come from? Who are these people of old who could build pyramids? Our planet's littered with all this stuff. Who are they? How did they do all these fantastic things? And what is our relationship to them? And it's my belief that our relationship to them has to do with consciousness. It has to do with developing a process somehow of raising our vibration to its highest level so we can reach a higher bandwidth. The second coming of Christ, which I believe is the second coming of Christ consciousness. And we have inklings of this all the time. And people, display, oh man, my 2 years with the Forbidden Discussion shows me that your average, everyday, run-of-the-mill human has amazing abilities, amazing visions and experiences and inklings of this higher bandwidth. And that's what we're getting to here, folks. And as we move into this high-tech culture where things are going to be changing rapidly, I believe that it is our only chance of survival to try to break out of the mold here and raise to our full potential. And I'm grateful to Henry Ford for providing that quote to me, because it spoke to me. It was liberating to Henry Ford to learn about reincarnation. I'm going to read that to you one more time from Henry Ford, because I just found it so striking. Let's see. Henry Ford. He says, "When I discovered reincarnation, it was as if I had found a universal plan." It was like he stumbled upon, a hidden treasure. It was as if I had found a universal plan. I realized that there was a chance to work out my ideas. Time was no longer limited. I was no longer a slave in the hands of the clock. And in other words, it's not just about the time span you have in this life. And I, for one, am all over that. It frees you up to where you have plenty of time to sort things out. And if you don't figure it all out this time, you don't get it right, if you make mistakes, you got other chances, other grades to graduate into. And it's a tremendous sense of hope. In the closed system of heaven and hell, your only hope is to do what they say and be submissive to them. And I don't buy that anymore. That heaven and hell story, I don't buy that at all. I don't buy that, the eternal lake of fire for the non-believer. I think that's a fear tactic to make you submissive and be under the control of the church. And I'm no longer for that. And again, it's a double-edged feeling, because on the one hand, I'm glad to have graduated into a much broader space. Hey, "Don't Fence Me In" is one of my favorite songs, all right? And but at the same time, I'm tremendously grateful for the religious education and experience that I've gotten. But I will no longer be confined in that grade level. So anyway, do with that what you will. I love you with all my heart. I'm giving it to you straight and authentically, as best I can, come what may. And I'm willing to get it wrong. I'm willing to look ridiculous. I'm willing to sacrifice myself in order to explore all of this, and hopefully to raise the vibration, and collectively we'll jump to that Christ consciousness level. That's what I got. I love you with all my heart and soul. It's 6 o'clock. Go out, have a great day. Stevie the Guide here in Kerrville, Texas.